okay, we've got this special event to talk about, the Glenn, Matt and Lucia thing. So we're going to have a look at that from the First Soldier. I don't have to do the whole The First Soldier episode, but because it's not an episode, it's a special event, so I don't have to do it. This is fine. So like the video, subscribe for future content. Let's jump into the events of the special event. Yeah, that works. Now, the special event was split into two parts. I'm just going to do it all as one because there's not, honestly, all that much that goes on, to be completely honest with you. It's all kind of stuff that we probably knew was coming. It's the timings that are a little bit different. We'll talk about it later, but I wasn't expecting the timing of one of these events. But let's jump straight into it. And we open up with Glenn, Matt and Lucia, a load of Wu-Tai troops, a load of Shinra troops. There's a fight going on. And it seems, obviously, that Glenn, Matt and Lucia have aligned themselves with the Wu-Tai Bros, or just the Shinra resistance in general. That's what it is. It's the Shinra resistance in general that they've aligned themselves with, which makes complete sense. They've got some cool little outfits on. They're looking a bit war painted up and scarred up. It's a good look for him. It's a good look for him. I'm into it. And Glenn is obviously the charismatic guy that he always has been, and galvanizes these troops under his control, under his banner. But Matt and Lucia do their bit as well. You know, it's not just a one-man show. This isn't just Glenn running things. You know, it's the group of them, and they are fighting against Shinra. They are fighting the good fight, and they are resisting against Shinra and trying to bring everyone under the same banner. So that's where they're at. That's their goal, and that's what we open with. So we're obviously after the point in time where they've deserted from Shinra. All of that's done, and it seems like a fair bit of time has passed. The events of Rador went down in 1992, if I'm remembering correctly, whereas now we're in 1999. So yeah, there's definitely been a bit of a time shift. I believe that this is way after the events of episode 2 of The First Soldier as well, which is also around the 1992-1993 time frame. So yeah, we're about 7 years later, pretty much at this point, about 7 years later, which brings us in line with the events of Crisis Core and bits of Before Crisis. We're pretty much in that kind of time frame. If I remember right, it's mentioned a little bit later on in this that due to the events of Crisis Core, you know, the desertion and stuff like that, that's why Glenn and everybody were able to take over Wu-Tai. But I'm jumping ahead here. I'm jumping ahead. Let's keep moving. So yeah, think about it. We're in Crisis Core times. That's what's going on right now in the rest of the world. And we get a flashback from Glenn, which tells us about the journey that they've been on and how they've kept themselves together after they deserted, basically. So it starts with that shot of them being taken out of the room that they were all chilling in with Sephiroth and Rifu. They've been taken to be interrogated. And then the next thing we see, they're out and about in the world trying to survive. And eventually we reach a point in 1995, so 4 years prior to the events of what's going on right now. And we see a meeting between Rufus and Glenn and the team. Team Glenn. And basically it's Rufus saying that, yeah, I'll give you money if you want to keep messing Shinra up. You know, we can work together, we can screw Shinra over. Sound good? Sound like a plan? And, you know, everyone's on it straight away. They're like, yeah, you're trying to get rid of President Shinra. But Glenn does not trust it in the slightest. Like, Glenn has no trust and no faith in this. And based on his gut feeling, they walk away. And it's just further proof that Glenn's intuition is pretty good. Because, you know, obviously going to get shafted. This guy is trying to usurp his father from the company that his father built that has given him the life that he wants. And, you know, he's trying to off his dad. He's trying to bump him off. So if he'll do that to his own dad, what will he do to you? And yeah, maybe the relationship's a little bit fractious between Rufus and Pres Shinra, but still, he cannot be trusted. Glenn's all over that. He's like, no, get out. Just leave me alone. And obviously, Rufus steps up the aggression a little bit, because very soon after we see that Glenn, Matt and Lucia's town was burned to the ground. So, you know, maybe they should have said yes. Anyway, we come back to the present day. Glenn, Matt and Lucia still stood there with the crowd around them and like, yay, let's go beat Shinra up, woohoo! And that's the end of that section. Anyway, we come back to Glenn, Matt and Lucia and they're in Wu-Tai. It stood on Dachau, I think they stood on Dachau, and they're looking out over the area. If they're not stood on Dachau, they're stood on something very similar to Dachau. And yeah, they've formed a committee. They've set up a headquarters in Wu-Tai. they're working on the people, you know, trying to get the people to accept them and join them in order for them to be able to, you know, take Shinra down. That's what this is all about, trying to take Shinra down. But interestingly, as the conversation's going on, we see Rufus wander over, which means that obviously something has changed since the previous meeting, because in the previous meeting, they were telling him, no, go away. Whereas now, Glenn's telling him, like, don't worry, no one will find out about your involvement in this, everything's fine. So, obviously things have changed as far as Rufus goes. Rufus is here asking for progress reports and things like that. And lo and behold, we get a flashback to the year 1996, so a year after the first meeting, and this time Glenn, Matt and Lucia are kind of resigned to their fate. Like, Glenn doesn't trust him still. Glenn doesn't trust Rufus one bit, but he has realised that them being on the opposite side of Shinra completely doesn't work. And at least by aligning themselves with Rufus, they get some degree of protection. You know, they'll be able to do the things that they want to do. Granted, it'll be at the whim and behest of Rufus, and it'll only be to further Rufus's agenda as well, and they will obviously be disposable. But in the short term, they get access to funding, they get access to support, they get access to intelligence. It makes sense as a short-term thing, but long-term, it's a big mistake. It's a super big mistake. Anyway, they decide to do a sample operation where they'll work together and do something, and the target was a Shinra convoy, but immediately Glenn gets a bad feeling. He's like, no, something's not right here, and even Matt's saying, yeah, no, this isn't right. And lo and behold, a chopper appears, and Sephiroth gets out. And it's not little baby boy Sephiroth anymore. No. It's teenage Sephiroth? Late teens? I would say this is late teens Sephiroth, because this is 1996. So yeah, late teens Sephiroth. And I'm hoping that if we do get an episode 3 of The First Soldier, which we'll discuss in the next video, I hope this is the time period that we end up in. You know, that in-between period, because we've seen young Sephiroth, and we've seen Big Daddy Sephiroth. What about in the middle? What happens there? So, yeah, that'd be interesting. But obviously, Glenn, Matt and Lucia know that they've been set up a little bit now. They know that they can't beat Sephiroth. This is Rufus messing with them. This is literally Rufus just messing with him. And that's confirmed by the dialogue that we hear, which is, oh, Sephiroth, you got immediate, urgent orders from the Vice President to be here. We've had our own issues with the Vice President. So obviously Rufus is messing about, and obviously Rufus has messed about here to send a message to Glenn, Matt and Lucia. And even though there's been that brief moment of betrayal, Glenn knows that they lose either way. You know, they need Shinra or they need Rufus. They can't fight them both, so they'll side with Rufus. That's the logic here, and that is the official formation of their alliance. Rufus, before Crisis Rufus with the weird hair, and Glenn and his little team. Team Glenn. The committee. There we go, that's what we'll call them, the committee. So yeah, the alliance is formed. But then we cut forward to the modern day, and it seems like everything's been going well. Like the group have been working towards this goal, but we all know Rufus. We all know what Rufus is and who Rufus is. He's a manipulator, and he's a Shinra. So, you know, I don't think it's going to go well for Glenn, Matt and Lucia. I feel like while they're useful to Rufus, all is well, you know? And Rufus will be like, oh, you guys are great. Keep doing the good work, guys. Let's go. But once they become surplus to requirements or more trouble than they're worth, he'll cut them loose. So, yeah. This is a good performance by Rufus, manipulating Glenn, Matt and Lucia and getting them to do what he wants them to do. The next section shows us the actual takeover of Wutai, so the committee fight Shinra back, basically, and this coincides with those scenes that we saw right at the very start of The First Soldier in the way long ago, where we see Glenn and Sephiroth facing off against each other. This is what's happening right now while this is going on. And that leaves us with a committee that have taken over Wutai. They've used this moment of confusion and this defeat of Wutai and the fight against Shinra. They've used that moment to swoop in, usurp power. It's not a bad move. It's not a bad move. Now, all of this is going on during the Fort Tamlin events of Crisis Core, it would seem. That's what it looks like to me. It seems like this is after the great soldier abandonment. I don't know what we can call it, but yeah, all the soldiers have quit. Genesis has started messing around, and Sephiroth has been sent out to figure out what's going on. that's why we see Sephiroth try to call Genesis and get hold of him, and that's when we see those scenes with Glenn and Sephiroth from the very start of the First Soldier. But in this moment, they have taken over. They've stepped in, and with Rufus's help, they've taken over Wutai and set up a provisional government. And that is what leads us into the events of Remake and Rebirth, with Wutai being this completely different entity. It's weird that none of this was alluded to in Crisis Core, or especially Crisis Core Reunion. None of this has been alluded to or connected to anything. So I'm still feeling a little bit suspicious of things as far as like what world are the events of Ever Crisis and the First Soldier taking place in. But that's a different story, like a bit of a reach there potentially, but it has come up a lot. It has come up a lot. But anyway, Rufus, the committee, they've taken over Wutai. The next thing that we see is in the second part of this story, and it is regarding just Rufus throwing everybody under the bus pretty much. So the next thing we've got is Matt, Glenn and Lucia, they're planning an attack on Arsenal Island, which is a big Shinra depot where they store a load of weapons and a load of technology and things like that. And they're all setting up ready for that, and Glenn's like, look, make sure everybody comes back alive, you know, don't get yourself killed trying to do the mission. If it goes wrong, just get out of there, survive. And, you know, showing that he's a good dude still, And then we immediately cut to Rufus, who's negotiating with Shinra and tells them that the attack on Arsenal Island's about to happen. And then he's just like, oh, let's see how you deal with that one, Glenn. What a dick. Now, thinking about it logically, it does kind of make sense. Rufus might feel that he's close to getting what he wants. He may have felt that certain parts of the resistance needed to disappear, like the ones under Junon, or like in the cave near under Junon. So he throws them under the bus, tells Shinra that the operation's happening, tells them where their base of operations is, which he also does, and that gets taken out. And yeah, screws the Junon resistance into oblivion. So that's kind of the end of them, it would seem. Everyone scatters and tries to find their own way back, you know, find a rendezvous point. But yet again, it was Glenn's gut feeling that told him that they were about to be ambushed. And the conversation continues, and they talk about how they understand that Rufus may want to test them and make sure that they're good, but they're not very happy with him using the troops and putting their lives in danger, you know, and risking them. So there's a little bit of a conversation about whether or not they should continue to work with Rufus and his little crew. But then we also find out that Rufus now has the Turks under his command. So maybe it's a case of now he's got the Turks, he doesn't need the resistance anymore because he's got a much more powerful ally in the Turks. That's a possibility, I think. I don't think we can overlook that. Anyway, some more Shinra troops turn up. A giant behemoth turns up. The behemoth kills all of the Shinra troops, and then Glenn, Matt and Lucia are like, okay, fine, we'll kill it. So they kill it. And afterwards we get a conversation about how it reminds them of the time that they were in Rador, and then we find out that Sephiroth is dead. And I did miss this at the start of the chapter, but it's the year 2007 now, so obviously we're way after the fact of the Nibelheim incident. We are pretty much at the start of Final Fantasy VII at this point, with the events of the OG kicking off in the latter part of 2007. So time has been ticking, and we are getting close to the present day, I suppose. Yeah, we're getting close to the present day. Anyway, they reminisce a little bit. They talk about how Rosen suggests that they may have been able to meet each other in the live stream one day. You know, when they pass away, they'll be able to find Sephiroth. So that's an option. Also, the fact that Sephiroth is in the live stream now makes me wonder, did he have something to do with that behemoth popping up out of nowhere? Maybe? Possibly? You know, to give them the opportunity to escape? I don't know. But anyway, helicopter pops in with Rufus in tow, and Rufus wants Glenn to come and get on board the helicopter. So they're having a conversation, talking about the mission, and how Rufus knew that Glenn would be able to pull this off. I don't see what the point of it was really, other than ingratiating himself to Shinra, because obviously he was pretending to be Viceroy Saruf, so he then threw the Junon branch of the Resistance under the bus in order to make himself look good to Shinra. That's what it feels like to me. But yeah, Rufus is in his dark phase right now, and he's throwing threats around a lot more willingly, Glenn especially, you know, basically saying like, yeah, if a dog starts to misbehave, we'll put it down. What? But the gist of what's happening is that President Shinra wants a face-to-face meeting with Saruf. So Rufus needs Glenn to be Saruf. Because obviously if Rufus turns up to be Saruf, that's just going to be laughable. Absolutely laughable. But midway through the conversation, Rufus gets a phone call and it takes him aback a little bit. We end up landing the helicopter and it turns out that President Shinra has been killed. So we are right at the end of the Midgar section of Final Fantasy VII, right at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and this kind of gives us the justification for how Rufus is able to get there so quick, because he was already heading back to Midgar with Glenn. Now, they land the helicopter just outside Midgar, sus, and they talk a little bit. Glenn congratulates Rufus on, being the big dog, and talks about how, they can change things up a bit now. But then Rufus is a bit, maybe I'll keep things how they are. Maybe things can stay as they are for a bit longer, and shoots Glenn in the back, which gives us the confirmation of what happened with Glenn and Rufus, that, the events that we saw in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Rufus thinking that Glenn was dead. He had a good reason to think that Glenn was dead. And it also gives us the reason why Sephiroth is able to puppet Glenn in the way that he is now. Because Sephiroth's in the live stream, but he's not only in the live stream, he's gone through that process and has come out ready to have an impact on the world. That's why President Shinra's dead. So we have got a Sephiroth that's coming up to, he's not at full power or anything like that, but he's powerful. He's capable, again, of doing things. And then Rufus shoots Glenn in the back. We see Glenn in the live stream, just kind of floating along and being a bit down on himself. And Sephiroth comes to him. Verbally, of course, we don't see Sephiroth, but it is Sephiroth. But basically, Glenn allows himself to become a puppet of Sephiroth at this point. He has allowed that. And it's because he's got things that he needs to get done. Not only that, it's partially because he's already losing his sense of self from what we can see in this scene. He's already starting to be like, oh, who are you again? Because he can't really feel it. And I suppose there is a very slim chance that it isn't Sephiroth. Maybe it's Rosen, who knows? But I'm pretty confident it's going to be Sephiroth. It feels like it's going to be Sephiroth, especially based on the fact that, this is what we see in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We see Sephiroth using Glenn as a puppet. So it's definitely going to be Sephiroth. Also, on this subject really quickly, Matt and Lucia probably dead as well, because I'm pretty sure they were getting picked up from Arsenal Island on a second helicopter. Glenn probably wasn't supposed to die in this moment. Rufus made that snap decision because of what happened with President Shinra, but I would guess that Rufus then reaches out really quickly to that other helicopter and suggests that they get rid of Matt and Lucia. We see in Remake that the SRC team that are on the ground in Midgar have lost contact with Matt and Lucia's teams, so it's not looking good. It is not looking good for Matt and Lucia. But it also draws pretty big parallels with the Remnants and Advent Children, because here we are again with Sephiroth obviously puppeting Glenn like we see in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but also potentially doing similar with Matt and Lucia at some point, because I'm not sure what the main reason would be. Obviously with Glenn there is a reason, and that's to mess with Rufus and use that confusion to get what he wants, which is seemingly at this point this war between Wu-Tai and Shinra, but that's a different conversation. But like I say, we've got Glenn being puppeted in this manner, potentially also Matt and Lucia. We've also recently seen Alyssa being used in a similar manner in The First Soldier, in the final, well, in all of episode 2. So it's not something that's outside the realms of possibility, and I think it would give a good parallel with Advent Children, with Loz, Yazoo and Kadaj, three of them. We've got the same sort of thing going on with Glenn, Matt and Lucia. Obviously there's more of a connection between Sephiroth and Glenn, Matt and Lucia, and it makes me think, is this Sephiroth learning? Like maybe Sephiroth at this point, the first time around, wasn't knowledgeable enough to do something like this, whereas after Advent Children, he's already done it once before and created these remnants and used them to reasonable effect in the world. So if this is Edge of Creation Sephiroth reaching back in time to try and alter the flow of destiny, maybe he employs techniques that he hadn't employed the first time around because he didn't know them. And that's why we're seeing a lot of differences. I don't know, maybe that last bit's a bit reachy, but it's good to get the explanation for what's going on with Sephiroth and Glenn at the very least. Or at least part of the explanation, there may be more to it. So, yeah, there's an interesting amount of stuff in this one, but none of it was particularly shocking. Rufus is a bit of a dick. Rufus does what benefits Rufus. Rufus throws people under the bus at every opportunity, and Glenn got shot. So, there's not really anything particularly new. I was hoping for a little bit more potentially, but we didn't really get it. But yeah, that's all there is to break down really in this one, I think. I don't think there's anything much more to break down. If you think I've missed anything, let me know. But yeah, the basic vibe is Rufus is a bad person in general. Glenn is a good person who just got thrown into bad circumstances in general. And at the end of this story, he's in the live stream and Sephiroth's gonna use him. That's what it seems like. And then that is what we see in Rebirth. Sephiroth using this facade of Glenn in order to manipulate certain situations like Wu-Tai and like Rufus to his benefit. That's what we're seeing. So yeah, that's all I've got for this one. If you think I've missed anything, like I say, let me know. Like the video, subscribe for future content, leave your thoughts in the comments, but more importantly than all of that, have a great day.